Previously on Just Add Taxes, as we go back and review everything we have been learning about the prequel to the things that happened before the Boston Tea Party. Remember, we had just exited the French and Indian War, which, by the way, was not between the French and the Indian. It was really over land issues that were going on in what would be, later on America and parts of Canada. And what was happening was both sides had Native American allies on their sides. I don't know why they called it the French and Indian War, but they just did. Kind of an odd name. Anyway, remember that to get through that, England paid quite a bit of money. Wars cost money. I mean, it costs money for food, shelter, clothing, medicine, ships. Everything involved with the war cost tons and tons of money. And yes, I mean, France, when they signed the Treaty of Paris, they lost tons of land, and we looked at the amount of land that they lost. But to recoup some of that money, England decided that they were going to start enacting different types of taxes. Now, they called them acts and things like that. But they had things that they go get like the Stamp Act. And what it was is it was a stamp that had to be on all paper. So if you were going to print something, a legal document, a magazine, a newspaper, anything of that nature, you had to have a stamp on the paper in order for it to be legal in the colonies. And the colonists were not happy about that. And so we talked about the Stamp Act the last time that we were together. And the colonists really had this thing of, listen, like, we don't feel like you should be taxing us because we have no representation in Parliament. So they had this saying of no taxation without representation, which basically was meant if we don't have someone in Parliament at least giving our side of things, we don't feel like you have the right to tax us. Now, whether that is right or not, you probably could argue both ways. But again, that's what it was about. So remember, they had some major things. They boycotted things, and they used other paper and things of that nature. They even had like a big meeting. The Stamp Act, when they got together, they had a meeting about the Stamp Act, and they were not very happy. So they had the Stamp Act Congress that got together, which probably should have been a sign to England at that point that some crazy stuff was going on in the colonies, that they were really starting to think outside of the box. But anyway, it is what it is. We have these guys called the Sons of Liberty. They were basically kind of a group of like troublemakers in a lot of ways. I mean, some of the stuff that they did to the tax collectors and other people, honestly and truthfully, I mean, I'm all for somebody voicing their opinion, but they did some crazy things, like painting people's houses with poop and tarring and feathering people. That's not cool. Can't do that. So eventually, though, the Stamp Act was gone. I mean, the colonists, with all their protesting and yelling and screaming, they actually got the Stamp Act to go away because it started to hurt England too much and the businesses of England. So it was repealed on March 18th. However, that really made England mad. And so with the Declaratory Act, basically what England was saying is like, listen, here's another law that we're going to pass that basically says we have the right to make laws and to tax you in any way, which is kind of weird because they did it beforehand without having that law. But anyway, with with that act, they were basically saying we have the right. So it's kind of, again, not that the colonists are really going to buy into that because they had no representation in that one as well. So again, like I've stated, a lot of what was going on in this time was all about the taxes that were going on. And if we look at the main reasons why England was taxing everybody, we know that England was taxing them basically to pay for all of the costs that they had incurred during the French and Indian War. So it was important for them to get some of that money back, to recoup some of that money. So, I mean, when you look at it, I don't think England necessarily was wrong in taxing the colonists. But then a new acts, I should say, were introduced. The Townshend Acts were passed by the British government. And boy, oh boy, they not only gave new taxes, they took some freedoms and things away from the colonists as well. One thing that was part of the Townshend Acts was it taxed paper, which, if you think about it, was the same thing as the Stamp Act. You had to have a stamp. Now the paper is just being taxed. It taxed paint. It taxed lead. It taxed glass. And it taxed tea. Probably one of the most favorite things of all English people at that time. They were drinking tea by the gallons. I don't think that's really kind of gone away for us here in North Carolina. We still drink tons of tea, except ours is sweet tea from Bojangles. They had a customs board in Boston to collect the taxes, so they've kind of now made the tax collecting place a little bit more official. They put courts in the colonies in America that was going to prosecute smugglers, because if you think about it, there's a lot of smuggling of tea and things of that nature. And one thing that's kind of crazy is it gave officials the right to search colonist houses anytime they wanted. They could search their house or businesses. And they were looking for all sorts of things, but especially illegally smuggled goods that may be in someone's home or their business, because if they found that, then they could prosecute them along with the smugglers. Now again, why did the British make these laws? Well, number one, they really wanted to get the colonies to start paying for themselves. I mean, not only was England, footing the bill for wars, they're obviously sending them money and aid and government officials as well to help the colonies run. Well, they wanted the colonies to kind of run on their own. So one of the things that the Townshend Act was specifically made for was to pay the salaries of governors and judges. Again, I don't really see a whole lot of things wrong with that. The British thought the colonists would be okay with taxes on imports. They got rid of the Stamp Act because of the colonial people protesting. And they were thinking, maybe if we just, put a tax on some imports, everything will be fine, because everybody in England's paying their fair share. Why shouldn't the people in the colonies be paying their fair share? Because after all, although you live over here, you're still British. But obviously, as we're going to learn, they're wrong, because that's not what was going on at the time, because the colonists, they didn't like these taxes either. So basically what's going on here is the Townshend Acts continued to push the American people further and further away from the British people. And it goes back to the taxation without representation. The colonists really felt that it was unconstitutional, honestly, for Parliament to put taxes on them because they had no representation in the Parliament. That's a big thing for the colonists. They did not want them to have that not be represented in Parliament and then be paying the taxes. I think it really, if you were to talk to somebody at the time and interview them, it really wasn't necessarily the taxes. It was the fact that you're not even let us being represented, and you're not even hearing our voice when we say that. It was more on the principle of everything. Well, the colonists decide that they're going to protest again. Because they thought that this was a violation of their rights. So they began to protest. Well, this time, because I think England had kind of learned a little bit of a lesson from the last time, they had a little bit more soldiers involved in this one to kind of keep order, so there wouldn't be so much tarring and feathering and houses painted with poop and things like that. So on March 5th, 1770, in the evening, there was a small argument between some British people and some of the colonists. Now, the colonists were kind of rude, man. If you really read deep into it, they were basically looking at dudes with guns saying pretty awful things and then saying, shoot me, I dare you. Don't be stupid. If someone has a gun, you don't throw sticks at them and put rocks inside of snowballs and hit them in the head and then yell at them, I dare you to shoot me. Eventually, someone is going to lose their temper and someone's going to get shot. And that is exactly what happened on that evening. And that evening was labeled as the Boston Massacre. Now, when I hear massacre, I'm thinking like thousands of people died, or at least hundreds of people died. And it wasn't necessarily that hundreds of people died, and I'm not even sure that I would label it a massacre that evening. So there's like 50 colonists. Okay, that's not a lot of people. Even if all 50 of them had died, maybe you could label it a massacre. But anyway, Captain Thomas Preston, he had some more soldiers come over to the custom house just kind of like the meeting house that they had to maintain order. But when the soldiers were coming with their guns, again, it just aggravated the crowd, and they began daring them. I dare you to shoot me. Again, I don't know that that's the smartest thing to do, yelling at someone with the gun, I dare you to shoot me. What if they accept the dare? I don't know. Just something to think about there. So they tried to get the crowd to go home. Now, again, I'm not sitting here taking the English side on this, because I don't know that there's a side to take necessarily, because I'm sure that they were probably not just standing there being perfectly, sane people as well, because if somebody's throwing snowballs with rocks in it, sticks, and yelling things at you, you're probably being pretty angry as well. Anyway, somebody hit one of the soldiers, knocked him down, and he shot into the crowd. Now, once he shot into the crowd, there's some people in history that say someone yelled fire, and then the soldier started shooting. There are reports that didn't happen. Maybe he just fell and his gun went off. Maybe he got hit in the head with a rock and got mad and just shot somebody. I have no idea what happened, and I'm not too sure that we're ever going to get the true story of that. And again, in this massacre that they talk about, immediately 3 people died. 2 people were hurt pretty bad and were in the hospital. They died later, so a total of like 5 people. Not necessarily a massacre that I'm thinking about, but it is what it is. And you can only imagine, like, if you think taxes made people mad, now some people have been shot and killed over the protesting over these, which is not necessarily going to be a good thing. You can watch this movie on your own. Very cool animated graphic novel. So after the incident, the crowd goes home. 13 people arrested, 8 British soldiers and 4 civilians. They're all charged with murder, the people that did the shooting, and put in jail. The troops kind of left the city to let things calm down for a little bit, because they knew that just seeing them around was going to really start making people mad. There's a really cool story in there. You'll probably hear a little bit about that in the comic book if you go back and watch that. But one of the colonists actually represents the soldiers and gets most of them off of the murder charge because it was self-defense, which says a lot about his character, I think. Because I think he understood that there were, even though he probably sided with the colonists, he still said, nah, you can't throw sticks and stones at people and dare them to shoot you and do things like that, and then get mad when someone gets shot. It was self-defense when you're throwing stuff at people like that, because you can really hurt somebody. That's a pretty interesting, unique storyline that kind of goes off. Maybe we can spend some time on that. We'll have to see how things go. But we'll move on. So the Boston Massacre really, really angered the colonists at this point. So a ship rolls into the harbor. It's got some tea on it. And basically the captain of the ship's like, I can't leave. I can't just turn around and leave with all this tea on the ship, because if I get back home and I've still got all my cargo, they're going to fire me. So we're unloading this tea tonight. Whether you're protesting against it or not, whether you're going to boycott this tea and keep taking illegal tea from Holland, because Holland at that time was smuggling tea in for the people in the colonies, and they were getting it to them a lot cheaper than England was trying to with all their taxes. Anyway, the colonists got together. They went to the Boston Harbor. They got on the ships, and they threw 342 chests of tea into the water. Now, here's where things get a little dicey. Some of the colonists were disguised as Mohawk Indians, hoping that if things went wrong, they could just blame it on the Indians. Well, that's not nice. I mean, if you're going to do something and protest, at least go out there and be a man about it. You know what I mean? Stand up for what you believe in. Don't dress up as somebody else so you can blame it on someone else. That's not cool. Anyway, it didn't fool anybody. The British knew who had destroyed the tea. The colonists knew who had destroyed the tea. So, it's one of those things that's kind of crazy that went down in American history. Oops, sorry. At the end here, you'll need to watch this video. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions for you to answer about those. I think you'll really enjoy that. Do answer those, because I think I'm going to use those as part of the grade today. Take it easy, smash that like button, and subscribe.